Please welcome to the stage Rebecca Kacaba, Dr. Charles Roberts, Chris Lyons, and Josh Topolsky.
Activate.
Yeah! Is this working? Good. Excellent. How's it going? Good morning. Look, I'm losing my voice, which is great. I'm sure the party last night had nothing to do with it. Welcome to a really exciting discussion. So I've been waiting for this the whole show, and I know we're getting close to the end here. Unicorns and supercorns, and really this is a conversation to talk about what every founder dreams of and every venture capitalist chases, right? And the companies that don't just break into the market but redefine it. And in a world of constant disruption, how do you identify the next Meta, the next Tesla before they blow up? And how do you find the visionaries that reshape the industries that everybody here is in one way or another? I have no doubt, right? This is like before they are in the app, and you're looking at Robinhood, and you're like, okay, I'm buying Tesla. How do you get there? And this conversation is really about that. So I'm really excited. We have an amazing panel here. I'm going to now take a seat because the chairs are set up, which is fantastic, and introduce the panel. Sorry, literally my voice is going. So first up, we have Chris Lyons, General Partner at Andreessen Horowitz and President of Web3 Media, A16Z Crypto. Rebecca Kacaba, CEO and co-founder of DealMaker, who hopefully you guys have seen out here doing some cool stuff, who's revolutionized how companies raise capital, and Dr. Charles Roberts, Chief Investment Strategist at ARK Invest. Charles was a deep entrepreneur and co-founding executive with a focus on AI for social benefit, primarily in healthcare, which I'm sure we're gonna talk about here. And I'm Josh Topolsky. I'm the editor-in-chief of Sherwood News and president of Sherwood Media. And I think I'll be trying to guide a conversation here. What I said to these guys backstage was the best case scenario is we just have a real conversation. I've got a bunch of cards here. There's gonna be a bunch of stuff on these monitors, but I really just want to talk about, getting into this, figuring out this world and hearing your takes on it. So very excited to get started. So I think to get going here, maybe we've heard a lot about AI. We can talk about this a bit. I'm sure obviously at every level here, we're talking about AI. Everybody's talking about that. It seems like a simple answer that's going to be the place where all the money is going to go, in the next 20 years. But is there something unseen that is not that hook? Is there some unseen movement happening? It's not just AI that you see. I mean, Chris, I assume you're looking at a ton of stuff all the time. So, what is there anything out there that people are missing?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's what people are missing. I think it's more so how people are thinking about it. And, we have actually, I don't know if it's a contrarian thesis, but I think that, there's two things that are happening with AI. I think the first thing is that it's just actually going to reshape how companies are going to be built. So if you think about just, how we've looked at structuring an org chart, how we thought about just really kind of compiling on an entire team and having salespeople, having designers, having the next generation of companies are going to be built completely different from scratch. And one of our contrarian theses, and I'm very excited to see this happen, is that we actually believe that one person will be able to actually build $1 billion company.
Really? Okay. So you're saying all those people that right now you're looking at a company, there's all these people in desks somewhere.
Exactly.
Those people are gone.
Yep.
They've been snapped away like Thanos, and
well, not necessarily.
they've been turned into dust. I mean, no. But is that? I mean, Rebecca, are you seeing a similar trend to that? What do you see out there?
Yeah. So at DealMaker, we're helping fund retail into companies, right? And so a big portion of that is merging the brand strategy with the capital stack. And so the companies that are best taking advantage of that are using the retail investor to fuel their growth and to really become that hyper fan and hyper champion of the brand.
Yeah.
Because brands really live online today. And so the retail investor can have a huge impact on the brands that they're investing in early days. So the category where we see the most exciting financial models on that are in sports. There's a ton of disruption happening in sports with streaming, right?
Yeah.
So you've got now the NFL moving into Europe, taking over some market share there. You've got the soccer or football teams coming over, taking market share in America. You've got streaming disrupting Major League Baseball and the financial models there. You've got private equity coming into the category. So where we can turn fans into shareholders and create that engagement, you can increase the lifetime value of the fan for the brand dramatically. And the capital is like a tiny component of it. It's actually about increasing the fan lifetime value.
I mean, this is interesting. Just, you're like, the future, like this unseen movement is like, we're going to actually, a lot of these people are not going to need to be there. And you're actually like, the people are going to be there in a completely different arrangement for that business, right? Like, now obviously it's not like the same thing, but it's just like how we're going to move human beings around. Charles, I mean, I'm curious, what is your take? Is there a force that you see moving that is?
I think directionally, I would land where Chris was saying, as in we're going to see much, just huge leverage of very small teams doing enormous things. I think in the near term, we just announced from ARK Venture an investment in OpenAI. We facilitated last week, we announced it 2 weeks ago, like a $250 million investment in OpenAI that we did through a special vehicle. So I think at one end, you've got the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, XAIs, these sort of mega players that are they've all raised now 6-7 billion-ish in the last year to do trains. So you've got them at that end. And I think that's a super exciting area. That's kind of becoming a game of kings and queens. I think at the other end, you've got what I would call like the thin wrapper companies, which I think are all just going to get steamrolled probably. As in, they're just a very thin layer on someone else's LLM.
Right.
I think in the middle category, you've got probably the most interesting area where I speak to some companies who've just raised, or they're raising $100 million, and then they sort of tell me off the record, they're like, the dirty little secret about what we're doing is actually we don't need to raise, it's just that we can. Actually, to train our models, it cost $15,000. So this kind of speaks right to what Chris said, right? So when you see that sort of thing, in extremis, that team of 5 people who are spending $15,000 to train and just raise $100 million, they've got like a few centuries of runway, right? So it's we're seeing already these incredible efficiencies coming in, and they're still doing really useful stuff at the other end. So there's so that middle category, I would call it like the agentic smart wrapper or what have you, and agentic meaning where you have AI agents which themselves do much further down the stack, and they can do many more tasks end to end sequentially.
Yeah.
But right now, why can't just everyone do that? The reality is there's still a real value in proprietary data. And having deep domain knowledge and proprietary data paired with an awareness of what AI can do and can't do. And I think that's where we're seeing a big acceleration of value. Because I think, one way to see it, if you sort of step to first principles, is pretty much every data, if you're taking a point of view, starting with any point of view, which we all do, any data set is a time series at some level. And what transformers have taught us, like GPT revolution, is that these models are very, very good at modeling time series and making predictions about what might happen next.
Right.
And I think, to me, it's like, as AI moves beyond just natural language and images into these more nuanced domains where, like in finance, like in, it could be some really, I don't want to call them boring, but kind of boring old industries, right, that have just a sequence of steps that happen, and they have really good data and domain knowledge. I think that's where we're going to see like real value generation that will surprise people.
Yeah. It's interesting on that note, and I would love to hear everybody's take on this. We see this huge investment in OpenAI. What is it? They raised $6.6 billion, right, on what, $157 billion valuation.
It was a lot.
You guys are in that right now?
We got some sliver in there.
So is that just on that note, because you're talking about people kind of having a thin layer on GPT or whatever, or do they become the plumbing? Is that the bet on a huge investment, like on something like that? Are they now going to be just undergirding an entire industry of services, or is there some other vision out? Like, is it because people go, well, they're going to replace search, but I don't think that's the $157 billion bet. Obviously replacing search would be huge, but do they, Chris, I'll start with you. Like, are they becoming does OpenAI become the operating system of the future?
I think, one of the things that's really interesting about the opportunity is, we call it like the application layer. And so you have infrastructure and you have application. And, the ability for not just if you think of some of the companies that have been the most successful, whether, Airbnbs are a great example, where, it's a marketplace for other people then to now come in and then create their own services. And so they're creating opportunity for more people to then now have resources that traditionally they didn't have before.
Right, like a whole new market there. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that when you think about like companies like, OpenAI or ChatGPT or other businesses that are going to be coming out, they're adding value for additional people to then now create things that have never existed before.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to open up the doors for the next generation of creativity, the next generation of consumer products, the next generation of search engines, the next generation, you name it,
Yeah.
of design, of fashion, of creativity. And when you can build products that then allow the infrastructure for then all of us to then have limitless possibilities to then build whatever we want to do.
Right.
That's where the real spark happens, and I think that's what creates the potential.
Yeah, Rebecca. I mean, obviously you're seeing a lot of companies, new companies all the time, right? You're working with, I don't know what your portfolio, how big the portfolio is, but it's a lot of stuff that you guys are doing. Are you seeing that? Is there a relationship there, like where something like an OpenAI has become kind of there's applications being built upon that platform, and do you see value in that?
For sure. And I can tell you as a tech CEO myself, right, like it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, right? If someone could come and rebuild DealMaker that I've been building over the last 7 years in half the time with half the resources, that's tremendously disruptive. So how do we as a tech company combat that? We've got to disrupt ourselves and build faster and build, exactly as Chris is saying, more scalable tools. And I can tell you that's the way our team thinks about it, is what can we leverage that's already out there? We're not going to try and reinvent the wheel. We never have. We're assembling component tools to build something that's greater. And that's the power of technology and what technology has always done right from the beginning. If you look at the first GUI system, right, it took something, it put an interface on something that an engineer used to need to be the one to code,
right,
and it allowed a regular person to use a computer. And so what we do today in allowing retail to invest in large amounts in $75 million, $100 million rounds, that's technology making something easier today that wasn't possible even 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, like, generative AI is going to supercharge our business in a way to make it incredibly more scalable, which is going to create a new market for retail to invest in alts that didn't exist 2 years ago and is going to be tremendously larger 5 years from now.
Yeah, interesting. That's so interesting to hear. That's like, it's powering something. I would not have gone to like, okay, just helping to create, like open up that market even larger because you can get that kind of acceleration. Charles, I mean, we talked about healthcare a little bit. Obviously that's a place you're very invested in, literally and figuratively. Like, is something like an OpenAI, like, does that just become the layer that the people are building? I mean, do we trust an OpenAI to be able to do the kinds of things that probably, say, like complex startups, like healthcare startups or companies that are trying to figure out very complex medical solutions? Is this something that you kind of put in the hands of the $6 billion investment?
I think it's going to be a part of, healthcare's a very big unsolved challenge, I think, and will be for some time. We were just talking about this in the dressing room on the way in. Look, I think directionally, more and more of human capital will actually gravitate to healthcare because it will remain an unsolved problem when everything else is fixed. It's like
right.
How much better does ride sharing or ride hailing need to get, right? Whereas Alzheimer's, we have a very long way to go. So as hopefully one of the things that brilliant minds and ingenuity can come to in human folks can work on is some of the remaining problems in healthcare once AI has hopefully given us a lot more sort of leisure or choice over our time. I think, OpenAI, Anthropic's also in our venture portfolio are working on healthcare applications for sure. Some of them are sort of still in stealth mode, I think. Some
right.
are working around with electronic medical records for sure at scale. How do you think about, I think some of the big themes in healthcare that an AI will enable is how do you build up a sort of multimodal representation of a whole patient? And think of it as, I don't know if machine learning people in the audience, but there's this concept of like word to vec. So how do you vectorize concepts, essentially, and where do things live in semantic high-dimensional space. I think what we'll increasingly see is much more of that at the patient level. So you take a multimodal representation of the electronic medical record, whatever other data you have about the patient, blood results, the genome, all that stuff, and you put it into sort of one big machine learning driven hopper.
Start stirring.
Stir it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You put it in the magic box, and then out comes what is the outcome from that?
Perfect scone of where the patient sits in kind of this embedding space. And not just where they sit, but where they're going. So it's like the vector of vectors.
Right.
And I think already we're seeing that AI is beginning to help enable that, and I think we're just going to see more and more of that. There's a company we invested in for ARK on the public side called Tempus AI, which I think is very set up for that future, and they're already doing this kind of stuff. And yeah, I think it's definitely on the roadmap for OpenAI and others. The challenge, as ever, is how do you just either have very high quality data or just lots of data, or ideally lots of very high quality data.
Right. Yeah, or it could just make stuff up. I mean, there's always that option.
That works.
Which I'm sure is great for healthcare. Always very good.
Shouldn't have did that.
No, that would be bad. Rebecca, I want to start this by asking you, how do you know when you've spotted something like this, you're like, this is huge, like this is the real deal? Like, is there? Tell me about what that experience is like. How do you evaluate to place that bet?
Yeah, so for us, it's a very data-driven approach because we're looking at raising digitally. There's a wide footprint that we can see engagement with a brand. Like to us, raising capital and brand is the same thing in today's day and age. Brands live online, businesses are being built online. So we're looking at the data that the brand interaction with the brand has prior to the raise, sometimes in a testing of the water leading up to a raise, during a raise, and then after a raise as well. And the brands that can really engage with their communities between raises are the ones that can leverage the power of retail. And so we know everything from, who likes that brand, what demographic it is, where those people live, what other products they consume. And so you can see through that data, and it's becoming more and more sophisticated, what the reach is going to be for that brand.
That's so interesting. But you really do look at like this as like almost like a fandom, like an investor to brand fandom. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm curious. It's funny. We talk a lot about. I mean, I think in particular when I look at. I mean, one of the things that we thought a lot about when we were building this news org within Robinhood was like the cultural aspect of these businesses is so important. Like, I mean, I'm sure everybody has a bet that they make that they're like Tesla's a good example. I think a lot of people love Tesla. I mean, love it or hate it. But I mean, Elon is a character, and he has got a storyline, and obviously the products are incredible. But it's like in a way a cultural buy for a lot of people, right? Like Apple for a lot of people who are like diehard, like old school Mac heads are like, yeah, I want to own this company because it means something to me. You're talking about on a broader scale, like investor to company sort of fandom, right?
Yeah, totally. And so it's about creating that relationship like you have with Tesla, but much earlier on in the life cycle. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so when you frame perks are getting incredibly sophisticated, you can frame the perks around things that build the business. We've got exciting companies like Death & Co., right? Restaurant bar chain, as well as bar supply company. You can give folks discounts on all the new locations. They know geographically where their retail investor is based. They actually now plan their new locations around where their retail investors are because they have discount codes. And now the company is more profitable in new locations quicker. So it's really that kind of thing that we're crafting to build incredibly successful companies.
Chris, when you're evaluating, does this kind of, I mean, I'm curious to hear your methodology. Obviously, I know there's like a lot of like, there's just data you've got to work through, right? And say like, does this business actually work on a spreadsheet? But like, does something like a fandom, is that a big part of it? How do you kind of balance? What's your balance for figuring that out?
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple ways to think about these things. I mean, I think fandom is definitely important in having kind of, we call it nerd energy, where there's a bunch of people that are building after a current space. I think that's important. I think for us, we also are thinking about like, okay, almost like planning theses, and this is where we think the space is going to go. And then hopefully somebody else was like, oh, I heard you wrote about this. That's interesting. Like, this is actually how we're thinking about this. And that we've had a lot of interesting companies that came from that way. But I think, like, for us, and I think that when it comes to just investing in general, just having a very contrarian view is where I feel like the most exciting and crazy opportunities are, right? We call them like good ideas that look like bad ideas. So, you know, like who would have thought it was a good idea to like stay at a stranger's home or like get in the back of a stranger's car?
When you put it like that, it does sound bad.
Sounds like a terrible idea, right?
Yeah.
You know, but then like if you think about like how, you know, Uber or Airbnb or Lyft have really transformed industries. Like, these are very contrarian point of views and how you think about things. And oftentimes, you know, good ideas do look like bad ideas, and you want to have what we kind of like to consider, you know, an earned secret.
Yeah.
So, like, how has your entire life brought you into this moment for, as a founder, you say, okay, I know something that nobody else knows, and because I earned this secret, and then now I'm going to go out and put my whole life on the line and build this company. And when, you know, those are the founders that have oftentimes kind of defied the odds, but also at the same time, you know, have pitched hundreds of investors and people have told them that they're completely crazy.
Right.
And those are oftentimes some of the biggest opportunities. And I think that even when across all different styles of investing, it's always easy to point the winner when it's the winner. You know, like, we should go invest into that. But that's not how, you know, I'm not getting, like, no financial advice, but you want to do things that other people aren't doing, so when things are actually already happening, you know, like the number one rule of investing is buy low, sell high, but everyone likes to buy high and sell low.
Right. Okay, but like, I mean, how do you distinguish between what looks like failing and what looks like solving a really challenging problem, right? Like, I mean, like if it's like it can't be done, somebody's like, I'm going to do it. Maybe they're not executing. They're not necessarily doing the thing quite yet. Like OpenAI is a great example, actually. You're like, you're going to do what exactly? Like, we love ChatGPT. It's super fun to play around with, but like, it's not like there isn't like a single killer like application where everybody's like, okay, wow, now I understand why OpenAI is the thing it is. So how do you distinguish between like what looks like failing and not, you know?
Well, I think it
working?
also determines. So the idea is half of it. The other thing is like, okay, well, what is it that you're actually going after? And so oftentimes people or founders will look at this kind of curve of, it's a small market right now, and so it sounds like a terrible idea, but once we build the thing that was not there beforehand, now we're with this new world of technology. Like in the last cycle, the smartphone was the catalyst behind all these things. You know, there was no GPS technology, and which made it impossible for companies like Uber and Lyft and, you know, you name it, the types of businesses to really kind of latch into this next generation. And I think that now, like, AI is going to be the next generation, quote unquote, mobile phone, where because of this, you're going to able to build out and create companies that have never existed before into markets that have never even been thought of or created.
Right.
And so you have to kind of have that squint of an imagination to believe that this crazy idea might work, and you know, the capital to hold your breath for the next 10 years to see if you're right or wrong.
It's a lot of capital. I mean, Charles, are you, I mean, never been done before, you know, wild bet. I mean, I would imagine in spaces like, you know, social good or healthcare, like must see a lot of things that are like, well, that's an outrageous idea. I mean, what is your evaluation there? What do you look for? Is there some gut feeling? Is it something more than that?
Yeah, so I think, well, building a couple of things Chris said, I really like the concept of earn the secret, right? Because that's, I think, a lot of times, and we see this in healthcare, we see this in lots of other settings too, it's only sometimes when people have had the crazy idea and the tenacity to execute against it that they find themselves, right, like in a clearing in the woods where they can see a bunch of pathways that no one else can see because they're not in that clearing. I think that's a really important thing. And then, you know, success often comes from pivoting around, going a little way into one of those and then changing mind. But you've got to earn that place, right? And you have to often done something really crazy or contrarian to even be there in the first place in that clearing in the woods. I mean, I like the concept of secret of investing is buy low, sell high. It reminds me of a soccer coach once who said it's super easy to win a game of football or of soccer. You just have to get the white ball in the net.
Right.
Exactly the same kind of.
To score.
Right.
Somebody told me that about
To
golf too. I'm still trying to figure it out.
No, I love that. Well, I mean, it's also, I mean, and this is, it's sort of teeing up the next question, which is doing the thing that is not the thing that everybody's doing. You touched on it, right? Going against the grain necessarily, which a founder might be doing or an investor might be doing. There is kind of this feeling of a herd mentality sometimes, certainly in Silicon Valley. Like there's this idea that, I mean, I don't know if everybody remembers the Yo app, right? Like this is the one I think about I talk about it, they're like, I don't remember that. I'm like, it was like, I think.
Talking about Yo?
Yo.
Yeah.
They raised like.
They came and pitched us. That was a very interesting meeting.
Right, what did they raise? Like 25 million, 50 million? The app, all it did, if you don't remember, it just, you could text someone Yo and they could text you Yo back. That was the whole thing. That was the whole, I think they raised like 25 million.
But you should have heard the ideas around what you could do with just saying Yo.
I mean, I'd like to know how much you guys put in it, actually. But it was like people were writing articles about Yo, like, I'm like, what don't I understand about Yo? Because it seems real dumb, and it turns out, not a success, but like, how do you avoid that herd mentality? Rebecca, I'm gonna ask you, because you guys you're taking a whole different path in a way with DealMaker, right? You're going, so how do you stay out of the group think?
Yeah, so I think if you look at how herd mentality develops, right, it's by people geographically or ideologically very close. And so with democratizing access to investments, I think some of that herd mentality does break down. Do we see herd mentality happening still in investments? Sure, AI has a lot of hype, but there's also a reason for that. Like there is a lot of value creation there. So we do see some of it, like us ourselves at DealMaker have benefited from what Robinhood has done, breaking down barriers for people to invest online, and now we can bring that to the alts category and break that barrier down even further. So I do think more access for retail up and coming in the upcoming years and democratizing access is going to break down that herd mentality. That's what Congress intended when they passed the legislation 10 years ago. And now that there's more technology being implemented, like us, like others in the field that are digitizing it, you're just going to see that gradual breakdown.
So wait, is this like a wisdom of the crowd situation where you're like, actually, I don't have to pick because the crowd will pick for me in some way? Like, is that, if you're seeing it, right, the signals are there, you go, all right, well, that's obvious. I mean, crowds can be wrong. There's a fine line between a crowd and a mob, right? Like, they can be wrong sometimes, Like, I do think that note is interesting, though, on these alternative markets. I mean, I feel like obviously being at Robinhood and seeing, like, what has been springing up. I mean, crowdfunding, this kind of like, direct like retail investor to a business is a pretty new model in a lot of ways, right? Like, and now you're seeing sort of betting markets take off. You're seeing all of these different, everything's a market all of a sudden, things like Kalshi and stuff like that. I mean, I'm curious, Chris, actually, because you're like institutional, right? I mean, you guys are both very institutional. I mean, I'll put it to you to start, but like, is there a shift away? Maybe there'll be a future we don't need VCs? Do you see, is there a more global crowdfunding? Do we get away from like this idea of the public market being just one specific thing and into, it could be anything?
Yeah, well, I think, most of the time people think about venture in a couple different ways. And I think for us, we've always developed the firm and been at the firm for 10 plus years. And when we first originated the firm, you have to look at venture capital as two different ways. Like for us, it's like, okay, yeah, there's a pile of money that an entrepreneur can take and then to help jumpstart their business. But our thing that we did that reinvented venture capital was the service-based industry, where it was thinking about, okay, now you're a first-time founder and you have no idea how to hire an executive team, or you have no idea how to go to market, or you have no idea how to have technical staff, or you have no idea about marketing, you have no idea about comms. And so when you think about it as just a purely financial investment, I think that's one area of the business. But for us, and the reason why we continue to want to work with the world's best entrepreneurs has nothing to do with about the money, but it's about trying to think about everything else that's needed in order to scale business. Because we've seen hundreds of and thousands and millions of companies that have capital but don't actually make it. And oftentimes the hard things that end up happening in the business have nothing to do about capital, but how you're thinking about certain solutions and how you're thinking about hiring the right or wrong person or making that executive decision in order to go into a different market versus and what we call quote unquote burning the ships.
Right.
And knowing that if we don't go this way, the company's gonna die. And who is going to be in your corner when you're actually thinking about those decisions. Now, you could ask ChatGPT if you wanted to. And
who should I fire?
You know, and just say, okay, we have a, Steve Jobs AI board member that's helping me lead the way. And we haven't seen that happen before, and that might be a thing.
That's interesting.
But,
I mean, so you're saying, like, it's not just the investment piece. And, I mean, that just cut out? Okay, it's working now. I mean, having gone through the experience of raising capital, starting a new business with VCs on board, there is a bit of like they're like the coaches. They're like there is a little bit of like a therapist, a coach, like all this stuff. I mean, so you're saying for the VC world, there's a protective layer somewhat maybe because like you need those other resources around. It's not just the pure dollars.
I mean, that's our sell. So come send us our deals, and we'd be happy to work with you.
Yeah. Charles, is the same for you, or how do you see this? I mean, I know in terms of the way the markets are expanding and what the role is of an investor.
Yeah, look, I think it's great when building a business of any kind, and I've mainly been involved in building biotechs. In fact, including a unicorn company backed by A16Z about 7 or 8 years ago called Freenome. But I think you have to be very clear about who is your user, right? And you probably have to focus on one user, at least initially, and then everything else builds around that. I think, obviously, in Freenome, that company, the user is the patient with cancer, and we just laser focused on that journey and that person. I think a lot of the investment industry, a lot of the VC world has to date, like if you look at like Iconic or many VCs, they're very focused on doing the best thing by the founder, which and the leadership and the business, and like Iconic has it saying, a lot of VCs have their different approach to how do they serve that founder and that leader. We also definitely care with ARK Venture about serving the founder, but we do it in a different way. So we come from the other direction. Actually, our primary user is the non-accredited investor who we serve with our venture product. So it's a very, it's the kind of the core ARK audience, I guess, is that non-accredited investor generally on the public markets too, but as of just quite recently, we've launched the ARK Venture Fund to serve that user. Really the vision, and it primarily came from Kathy, the founder of the fund, that it's fundamentally non-democratic, that non-accredited investors have been locked out of this incredible asset class that's delivered fairly consistently as one of the best asset classes, and probably for obvious reasons to everyone in the audience, that there is a fundamental market inefficiency in private markets. Because there's an access arbitrage, right? It's not like everyone can just go and buy these companies. It's and Chris will tell you, Rebecca too, it's a lot of work to find diligence and get into these companies. And to your point about herd mentalities, the great companies are even harder to get into because the herd comes around, right? Sand Hill Road is a short road. So back to our non-accredited user, the way we think about it is the whole accreditation process. And it's kind of a legacy concept in a way. And there's loads of great ways people can lose money in very foolish ways, quite outside investing in private companies. There's tons of opportunity to lose money well.
Probably more opportunities to lose money.
More every day.
I mean, what is this, like? It's like 10% of the, what is the percentage of the companies that actually make it? It's something like 10%, right?
No. Way less.
Less than that?
Yeah.
What's the number?
I would say
1%?
Startups are hard.
That have like a good exit?
Yeah, most companies don't go public. I would say 1% for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about
many more bad opportunities for people than good.
Yeah, in investing in venture, we call it the Babe Ruth effect. So like Babe Ruth had the highest number of strikeouts, but he also had the highest number of home runs. And so when you're thinking about investing, you have to swing for the fences at every single time because one out of every 10 companies can potentially return that fund.
Right.
And so your job as an investor is to get into that company that could potentially return the fund.
So, I mean, Charles, what you're talking about, I mean, Rebecca, you're doing this, right? It's in essence, right? You're opening these like private companies, the market for them up to an audience. I mean, are you saying the vision is that's just going to be a widespread, like, does OpenAI, the next round is raised by like all the people in this room? And I mean, is it just like, does it become that kind of situation? Because how do you do need like I don't want to say you need a gatekeeper because nobody wants gatekeepers, but like you need somebody to be like, hey, this is a good idea. I mean, obviously, DealMaker, you're evaluating stuff. You guys are evaluating, but then how do you pass that on to to a retail investor?
Yeah, I mean, where we are seeing our role emerge is really as a portion of the capital stack. So what Chris said is absolutely true, right? You've got lots of different benefits of all the different types of capital a company can take. They can take debt, they can take VC, strategic, and retail. What we're seeing is retail emerging as a strategic source and really bringing value with that strategic source. But you've got a huge amount of the companies right now using retail as a component of their capital stack alongside VC, alongside...
Right, so they raised some money from Chris.
Yep.
Charles, maybe.
Yeah.
And then you go raise a little bit more.
Yeah.
And everybody basically agrees.
And you see, like, unicorns doing it today. You've got Reddit doing it as part of their IPO. You've got Substack doing it as part of their Series B. Both of those are AZ16 companies.
Yeah. I guess it's tough if you're not, like Reddit's very, like, great. If like you're a normal person, or let's just say not a normal person, because I think the people here are on a different level, but you're an investor and you're looking for opportunities. Reddit's an easy one, right? We all, like, everybody here is like basically raised online. There are much less sexy companies, right? Like, does it have to have like sex appeal? Is that what makes the next? Is that how we get to the next Tesla? Is there gotta be some amount of, something that's just like that cultural component to it? Or I mean, how do we fund companies that are doing things that are very unsexy? Like, I don't know. Like, earlier we heard about, a company that's doing surgery, right? That's doing this like robotic surgery. I don't know that everybody's like, wow, that's like, I want to get in that.
Oh yeah, I mean, robotic surgery arm, they've done over 100 million of retail. So that, yes, it has to be sexy.
Everybody does want to get in it.
It does, but it has to be a big opportunity. Like retail, what we see is largely looking for the same thing that Chris and Charles are describing, big opportunity, something that's going to change the world, something that people can identify with. And what we see is every company has a slightly different community. So that robotic arm that's doing knee surgery really appeals to an older demographic who's experienced bad knee surgery and knows it needs to be better.
Right.
Whereas, an AI-driven makeup company like Proven Skincare that has a much lower age demographic and skews totally differently.
Yeah, so it's just finding that you're going to find those pockets, right, basically. I mean, do you see this turning into, like, does this become more like the public markets at some point? There are exchanges for all of these private, by the way, I'm thinking about all of this, like, stock I have in VC-backed companies that I've been at that's sitting, like, they're like, yeah, when they IPO, I'm going to be very, very wealthy. I mean...
And how many years has that been?
Well, it's been a long time. It's always 18 months out. We're always 18 months out from the IPO. It's been like a decade of 18 months out. But someday.
We hope that you forget 17 months before we tell you 18 months.
Yeah. But does that become like right now, if I want to do anything with my shares of that business, there's not really a great market for it. And in fact, like a lot of those places that have those secondary markets, it's unbelievably complicated. I mean, from just the governance perspective from the company itself. So how do you do, I mean, Charles, I'll throw this to you. How do you like create a system for that? I mean, and not that you're going to personally do it, but.
Yeah, so the way we think about it, I think, I can maybe speak in the general, because we're seeing some very interesting moves, right, across the whole investing. A lot of these players coming together and moving in different ways. You've got more the crowdfunding end coming in. You've got Republic, and then you've got eToro and Coinbase and SoFi, which our ARK venture fund is on right now. That's the main way people buy it. Titan. You've got obviously amazing things Robinhood are doing. So I think there's that whole milieu, and we don't really know how that shakes out at some point, right? Almost, it feels like in the limit, every asset becomes available on every platform, and obviously it won't be exactly that. It'll be people specializing. I think the way we think about it from a venture lens is, right now, and it's sort of start small and it's nascent, it's early days, at least with the ARK Venture lens, and maybe I can talk more generally too. We, in the long run, would love to have, like, our big mission would be almost a third way, sort of somewhere in between pure private and public, where companies are enabled to stay longer private, partly as a result of what we and others like us do, right? Like, so, you can always, we actually did a X Spaces conversation with Elon just before Christmas, like 100 minutes. He was talking about all sorts of different things. I wrote it up in a blog on our site. But he was basically, essentially one of the takeaways was, I kind of wish Tesla wasn't public in many days of the week. And it feels like he enjoys the SpaceX journey more, maybe, because it doesn't have that scrutiny and all the, not the scrutiny, but just all the downsides that come with being public. And he's quite clear about how he sees what those are. So we would like to, right now, it's a small fund and we're doing $2-3 million checks. And actually, typically, we're not leading, so we'll follow, like, we get referrals in from A16Z, from Sequoia, from DCVC. We get referrals in from top-tier venture funds who love what we do, and we're not taking such a big check that it's a problem. And maybe I'm a few different topics, but back to the thing I was saying before about the way we think about the retail investor or the non-accredited investor and bringing them to be beneficial to the founder and the company is by having, like, our superpower is having reach, it's having a big open research ecosystem. What I would love to do, and we haven't, systematized yet, but it's happening a little bit organically, is think of, like, the Tesla shareholder who's also a Model 3 owner and is a champion for that company. Yeah. We want to bring some of that to the private markets. We already have nearly 10,000 individual investors through SoFi, mainly on the platform.
Right.
In the limit, I'd love that to be a few million investors. And we want those people to be champions, like early product adopters, helping companies find talent, like rebroadcasting stuff to their own network. And I think that's where both the founders and these other VCs who send us deals see value in that ARK platform. But in the limit, I'd love it if it was, we're managing tens of billions of dollars and we can actually,
of course, I'm sure that would
be
very good business.
But you don't want to fall necessarily, no bad thing about, the heady days of 2021, right? But we saw some of the big crossover investors, I won't name any names, but doing very big deals, over-capitalizing companies, which I think is one of the biggest risks, actually.
Right. Well, that is one of the big concerns.
Making them super inefficient. I mean, it got pretty crazy back there. Like, several times I saw companies raising, like, I don't know, one example, Garden, which is a public company. It's in our portfolio and as a competitor or peer of the company I co-founded, but raised 360 million at some point from crossover investors because their test was called 360. So it's like, you see, when you start seeing things like that, you're like, that's not actually driven by the needs of the business. That's a fun thing.
All right,
which is great.
We only have a couple minutes. I want to just ask this one, which I think hopefully we'll get some interesting response on. What is a red flag? What is the worst trend? And Chris, I'm going to start with you, that you're seeing in the world, in the investing world right now, or even that the things that are coming, that are being put in front of you, that are hitting your table. Like, what is a trend line that has picked up steam that you think is it's the wrong direction?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that are happening on the trend side. I mean, I would love for us to go back into, liquidity and DPI starting to happen. I think that you're really starting to see, not necessarily a consolidation of funds, but LPs, people, venture, we're the ones that are making the investments, but we have to have money that's actually coming from somewhere. Yeah. And I think that the big thing is coming from LPs who can deploy capital and then say, okay, well, when is my money coming back? And I think that you've seen situations happen, like with Stripe, when I think it was Sequoia or someone did like a certain specific type of fund, so that way they could actually start having DPI start coming in. And so I think things like that are starting to happen. But I think the real red flag is just is funds that are kind of, like we said, not necessarily herd mentality, but going based off of certain trends. And so, it might be crypto, and then next thing you know, it's like, oh, now we're going to be an AI fund, and now we're going to be,
Well, they don't have a thesis.
Yeah, and I think the thesis, like really having a grounded center is the most important thing. I mean, I work really closely on our crypto team, And our best work always happens in the winter when nobody else is actually like paying attention. And that's when, if you look at cycles, it always happens when people aren't looking at things.
Yeah.
And I think that the red flag is trying to do things when people are doing things as opposed to doing things when no one's looking.
Yeah.
And rather than focusing on, you know, the space that you think is going to be the next thing, because that's where the opportunity lies, is trying to, you know, run in line when everyone is doing the same thing, then thinking that you're going to be the one that's going to be the winner in the space. You might be, but you're going to be alongside 500 other people that are believing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the red flag, and also where the opportunity is.
Yeah. Rebecca, quickly, because I know we're running low on time, but for you, I mean, is there a red flag? Is there you see something, a trend that you don't like?
Yeah, I think Chris really said it well. I'll just say it slightly differently, is when you've got this bubble of unicorns that aren't going public and aren't returning liquidity, then you've got people who can't raise their new funds, and, you know, not the AZ16s of the world, but like the tier 2 and 3 funds, and then that has an impact on the founders and the companies getting more access to capital, and then they're pushing the companies in a different way. A lot of good companies can't get funded, and so I think a more diversified capital market is the answer to that.
Okay, interesting. Charles, you know, last thoughts on this?
I think a red flag is, I mean, valuations can get super out of whack. I think, to me, because I spend time as a crossover investor on the public and the private side, it's when valuations on the private side or the public side get completely discombobulated with the other side. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, right now, you're still seeing, I mean, we don't do it so much for the venture fund, but for my angel investing sometimes, I'm still getting sent quite a lot of very early stage companies that are nowhere. 20, 30, 40, 50 million valuation. I'm like, that is literally bananas. Like, you can go in the public market and buy a really great company that's either doing something great, has great traction, amazing team, and they're just hammered by it. I mean, it's like the Warren Buffett thing, right? Like the public markets will get a lot crazier than any owner leadership will ever get. So I think that's one big thing, is when you see that massive public-private dislocation, and we are seeing
just a feeding frenzy on the valuations. Just people are just is it a fad? Are we just overvaluing ideas?
I just think it's worth looking at both sides of that aisle, right? Because
like
clearly,
comparing them to a public company and saying, like, does this make any sense?
Well, we see it as, or, you know, I've always seen it, but we see it as our venture as like, great companies are great companies because they have amazing founders and leadership who have spotted something. They have amazing culture, and they're executing against a vision.
Yeah.
And they've got their eye on the prize, and they might pivot and whatever along the way, but they never change their why. They might change their what, and they might change their how. And it shouldn't matter whether they're public, private, or whatever, but when you see valuations get sort of so dislocated, as we've seen, I think that's one huge red flag for me. And that's happened a lot in the last couple of years. They've flip-flopped, often with like a 6 to 9 month tail, and they'll get out of whack in both ways. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing is I'm seeing quite a lot of is we're still being pitched often business plans, or we're seeing people make 2, 3, 4, 5 year plans in companies based on business models that will probably disappear or completely be disrupted.
Right.
So as a good example, you know, someone making like a 3-year business plan based on seat-based SaaS, I would argue is deranged.
Right.
Because
Well, they think you're deranged.
What's that?
They might think you're deranged.
They might well, right.
Because they're thinking you're going to believe
But this is
that.
exactly it, right? But to your point about looking where no one's looking. Exactly. So my bet is, and I could be deranged, and maybe Gary Marcus is right, and a lot of the AI stuff is not going to come to pass. And I do think there's a 5 to 10, 20% chance we slide off down the Gartner hype cycle, right down the snowboard down that slope for a long time and end up in some bad place. But I think if I'm not deranged, I may well be. The likelihood is that agentic AI, where we hand over the keys to the car and end-to-end sequential decision-making is being made by AI models, could just obliterate most of SaaS-based, seat-based business model, right? Because it's like, and actually, Brian Armstrong did a great tweet on this a few weeks ago. Again, this is one of these things I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to. But his tweet was saying, this is really cool, we just ran this experiment where you can use crypto to pay for API calls among and between agentic AI systems. Mm-hmm. Because they're always on, you don't have to pass like KYC.
Sounds great for the grid.
They can do a transaction on a Sunday morning when everyone's asleep with a hangover, right? So it's like, that could be the way that essentially all of the whole economy could eventually move to that, right? Just, everyone has multiple agents acting on their behalf.
Yeah.
They're just doing almost all of what we currently consider the economy is just API calls paid for in crypto between agents that are doing stuff. So it's like, you don't say like, you don't go on. It's entirely possible in 2, 3 or 4 years time. We just don't have that workflow where we're paying bills, we're paying tax things, we're paying like the bills for the bills that we forgot to pay, and we're paying the fees and fines, and we're planning our holiday, and we're researching flights. Like that probably will all get extracted.
One to one.
You probably just have a bunch of AI agents acting on your behalf. It's the tip of what you actually do is the tip of the iceberg. All this other activity is going on.
Yeah.
And again, if you're doing that, you're not going to need 15 different SaaS subscriptions that you forgot to cancel because it's hard to remember. You need to click on Apple and your face picture to cancel all that stuff.
So I think the lesson here is don't make a business plan. That's what I'm hearing. No, just
Wing
6
it.
months max.
Survival of the fittest, I think, is the point. And it's like when you're evaluating teams, you're like, is this team, not just the person, but is the team super adaptable and robust and resilient? And survival of the fittest, it's worked since Darwin and before.
Well, I have a feeling we could continue this conversation for a while, but we unfortunately have to wrap up. I got to say thank you guys so much. This is an amazing conversation. Give a hand for Rebecca, Charles, Chris. Thank you so much. Thank you guys.
See you guys.